Last Tuesday, my son looked me straight in the eye in front of his fiance's wealthy Boston parents and said, "I just eat and don't contribute." He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather, while standing in the kitchen I built with my own hands. The room went quiet. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I didn't argue, I didn't shout. I simply counted 10 slow seconds in my head and said, "Interesting perspective, son. My name is Joseph Moretti. For 45 years, I ran a small Italian restaurant in San Francisco. I built it from nothing, brick by brick, standing on tired feet from sunrise to midnight, so my son Daniel could live the kind of life I never had. He became a lawyer, drives a new BMW, and lives rent-free in my $2.8 million house. I thought I was giving him comfort. Turns out I was giving him permission to forget where he came from. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the same one where I'd once taught Daniel how to balance a checkbook, and replayed his words again and again. "You eat and don't contribute." Every syllable hit harder than the last. I realized it wasn't anger talking, it was contempt. And contempt doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows when people forget gratitude, when they start believing love is measured in money, not respect. So I decided to remind him quietly, methodically, without raising my voice. While he was busy impressing people who couldn't care less, I began planning 3 moves that would change both of our lives forever. He thought I was old and harmless. He had no idea what I was about to do. When Daniel was little, he used to sit on the kitchen counter while I stirred a pot of Sunday gravy that simmered for hours. He'd dip a spoon in when he thought I wasn't looking, laugh when I pretended to scold him, and try to repeat my Italian words with that clumsy accent only a kid could pull off. Those were the good years, the kind that make you think love and tradition can last forever if you just work hard enough. But somewhere between college and success, that boy disappeared. The little kid who once rolled gnocchi with flour-covered hands turned into a man who flinched at the sound of his own last name. Daniele Moretti became Daniel Moore. He said it made things easier for clients to pronounce. What he meant was that it made it easier to forget, easier to erase the accent, the story, the people who built his foundation, one plate of pasta at a time. One day I noticed the change wasn't just in his words, it had taken over the house too. The family photos that once filled our living room were gone. The picture of my parents on their wedding day in Naples, the one of Daniel's baptism, the holidays, when everyone crammed into the kitchen until midnight, all replaced by abstract art from a fancy furniture catalogue. The walls that used to tell our family story now looked like they belonged to someone else entirely. He said it was about modernizing, about making the home look more contemporary for when his colleagues came over. But what he really meant was cleansing. He was scrubbing away the smell of garlic and the sound of laughter, anything that reminded him of where he came from. It's strange watching your own legacy be redecorated out of existence. You spend your life thinking you're building something for your children, that every sacrifice adds another brick to their future. And then one day you wake up to find the walls still standing, but the soul has been gutted. What's left looks polished, expensive, but hollow, just like the new name on his business card. That's when I realized I hadn't just lost my son to ambition. I'd lost him to shame, and shame, once it settles in, can eat through generations faster than fire. The first time I heard Daniel introduce me to one of his colleagues, I almost thought I'd misheard. We were hosting a small dinner for a few people from his law firm, and I was in the kitchen, making sure everyone had enough wine. One of the guests asked who I was, and Daniel, without even looking up, said, "Oh, that's Joe. He takes care of the property." For a moment I just stood there, holding the wine bottle mid-air. Property maintenance. That's what I had become in my own home. Not his father, not the man who worked 16-hour days to give him this life, just the help. The laughter from the dining room blurred into a dull hum, and I realized none of those people knew who I really was. They saw a man serving wine, not the one who paid for every inch of marble they were standing on. After they left, I walked through the house slowly. It looked familiar but wrong, like a stage set built for someone else's story. The silver crucifix that used to hang in the hallway was gone. So was my mother's old copper pasta machine from Naples, the one Daniel used to play with when he was little. Even the framed article from the San Francisco Chronicle calling my restaurant a neighborhood treasure had vanished. In their place were Daniel's trophies of success, his Harvard diploma, his bar certification, photos of him shaking hands with judges and local politicians. Every wall screamed about what he had achieved, but none of them whispered where he came from. The warmth of a family home had been replaced by the sterile pride of a corporate office. People talk about how kids outgrow their parents, but what they don't tell you is how painful it is to be erased by your own child. It's like watching your life's work repainted in colors you don't recognize. I kept thinking about how every picture he took down wasn't just a decoration, it was a piece of our story, a reminder of who we were. When he looked at his walls now, he didn't see me or his grandmother, or the years of struggle behind that diploma. He saw a man who had reinvented himself, someone shiny and untouchable. And I couldn't help but wonder if success was worth it, when the price was pretending you built yourself alone. When I sold Moretti's trattoria, I thought I was closing a chapter on hard work, not on dignity. 45 years of early mornings and late nights of kneading dough before sunrise and mopping the floor after the last customer left had earned me a modest retirement. My plan was simple, maybe travel back to Naples, see my cousins live quietly for once. But Daniel had other ideas. He said the house needed renovations, that updating it would increase its value and create the right impression for his colleagues and clients. I didn't argue. He spoke like he knew best with that polished confidence law school had taught him. So I did what fathers often do. I listened, trusted, and handed over my savings. $430,000 later, the house had a new kitchen. Marble counters, hardwood floors, designer lighting, the works. Everything Daniel picked himself. When it was finished, I stood in the doorway, waiting for him to notice. Maybe a small thank you, a quiet, "You've done enough, Dad." Instead, he walked through the place like an investor inspecting a property. He ran his hand across the counter and said, "Now it finally looks like a home I can bring clients to." That was it. No smile, no acknowledgement, not even eye contact. Just satisfaction, like a man proud of what he built. I stood there, realizing I had paid to erase the last pieces of myself from that house. The warm, rustic kitchen where his mother used to cook Sunday gravy was gone, replaced by something cold and modern, a showroom for strangers. I started noticing the pattern after that. Every smart investment he pushed was never about family. It was about appearances. The home wasn't a place to live anymore. It was a proper stage for his career. The man who once spent weekends learning my recipes now spent his time curating the perfect backdrop for photos. It's a strange thing, watching your life's work turned into someone else's status symbol. You think giving your children everything will make them grateful. Sometimes it just teaches them how to take more. And when they finally get what they want, they look around and forget who gave them the foundation to stand on in the first place. That Sunday I woke up before sunrise the way I always had back when the restaurant was still mine. I went to the market, bought the freshest San Marzano tomatoes, basil from my garden, and sausages from the old butcher who still calls me chef. For 6 hours I cooked the kind of meal that once brought our entire family together, a slow, rich Sunday gravy that smelled like home. I wanted to make something special for Daniel and his fiancée's parents, a real Italian dinner that spoke louder than any business deal ever could. By late afternoon, the house was filled with that familiar warmth, the sound of sauce bubbling, bread cooling on the counter, a bottle of wine waiting to be opened. I imagined us all sitting around the table, sharing stories, laughing the way families used to before everyone got too busy pretending to be important. But just as I was setting the table, Daniel came into the kitchen, dressed in one of his expensive suits, phone in hand. He didn't even look at the food. He told me they'd be dining out instead. Some high-end French place, he said, was important for his relationship with Bethany's family. I didn't argue. I simply turned off the stove, poured the sauce into containers, and said, "Enjoy your evening." They left not long after, the sound of their laughter fading as the front door closed. 3 days later I found the containers in the trash, untouched. The same sauce that once made my son smile when he was a boy now sat rotting among coffee grounds and takeout boxes. That's when it hit me. Not just disappointment, but something colder. The little boy who once begged for extra meatballs, who used to tell his friends his dad made the best pasta in the city, was gone. What stood in his place wasn't my son anymore. It was a man ashamed of everything that made him possible. And there's no heartbreak, quite like realizing the person you raise now looks at your love and labor as leftovers. That night I didn't cry or curse. I just cleaned the counter, threw out the trash, and told myself one simple truth: love without respect doesn't fill a table, it empties it. The night everything finally snapped wasn't loud. There were no shouting matches or slammed doors, just a few polished words that cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. Bethany's parents, the Crawfords, were visiting from Boston. Old money, the kind that doesn't brag because it never had to. I'd spent the day quietly helping prepare the house, making sure the place looked welcoming. I stayed out of the way during dinner, pouring wine, cleaning plates, listening to polite conversations about country clubs and investment portfolios. Then came the moment. Mr. Crawford turned to me with a friendly smile and asked, "So, Joe, what's your role here? Are you and Daniel partners in something?" It was the perfect opening, the kind of question any son could have used to honor his father. All Daniel had to say was, "That's my dad. He built everything I have." Instead, he leaned back in his chair, glanced at his guests, and said, "Calm as ever, he lives here. But honestly, he just eats our food and doesn't contribute much." The room went silent. I could feel every heartbeat echo in my chest. His fiancée's mother looked down, embarrassed. His father-in-law cleared his throat. Bethany froze. And I just sat there staring at my son, the same boy I once carried on my shoulders through the streets of North Beach, the same kid I worked 16-hour days for acting like I was a burden. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply nodded and said, "Interesting perspective, son." Then I stood up, excused myself, and walked upstairs. In my room, the noise of their laughter faded to a distant hum. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at the screen for a long time. That's when something inside me clicked, not in anger, but in clarity. If my son wanted to believe I had nothing to offer, then it was time to show him what real contribution looked like. That night I made 3 calls, the first to my banker, the second to my lawyer, and the third to someone who would make sure Daniel's entire world changed before he even realized what was happening. The morning after that dinner, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the same seat where I once helped Daniel with his homework, and started mapping out my next steps. This time there would be no second chances. No emotional speeches, just action, precise, deliberate, and final. The first move was the bank. I walked into the branch I'd used for years, the same one that handled my restaurant accounts back in the day. Patricia, my account manager, greeted me with her usual warmth. She'd seen me go from flipping pizzas in North Beach to selling my business, so she didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Patricia," I said, "I need to know what my house is worth right now. Current market value, no fluff." She typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward me. $2.8 million. I nodded, not surprised. North Beach real estate had exploded in value, and I'd been sitting on a gold mine without even realizing it. If I sell, I asked, how fast could it close? Cash buyer, no contingencies. She smiled, a little impressed. 30 days, maybe less if you're ready. Move one, information done. Next was the immigration lawyer. I'd spent half the night researching firms that specialized in family reunification. I found one in the city, Chen and Associates. The attorney, David Chen, was the kind of man who understood stories like mine because his parents had lived them. I told him exactly what I wanted to sponsor 4 of my relatives from Naples. Young, hard-working, and ready to build something. Marco, Sofia, Luca, and Lucia. He leaned back, studying me. "Mr. Moretti, that's a big commitment. You'll be financially responsible for them, for years, housing, insurance, the works." I met his gaze. "Money isn't the issue. I'm building a family again, one that still remembers what gratitude looks like." He nodded and started the paperwork, moved to legacy, set in motion. The third stop was a real estate office in Union Street. The agent, Jennifer Martinez, was sharp and no nonsense. She remembered me from when I'd sold the restaurant. I told her I wanted to sell my house fast, quietly, and for cash. No open houses, no signs, no gossip. Just results. She blinked. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Completely. And one more thing. My son can't know until it's done." Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't pry. "Understood," she said. "I already have a few cash buyers lined up. 2 weeks if you're lucky, move 3 execution. Secured." By the time I walked out of her office, the city felt different. The air was lighter, sharper. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to my son's decisions, I was making my own. He thought I was too old to matter, too sentimental to act. What he didn't realize was that men like me don't break quietly. We plan, we adapt, and when we move, we don't miss. Once I had the plan set, everything moved with quiet precision. I didn't rush, didn't make a single misstep. Years in the restaurant business had taught me how to handle chaos timing. Patience and knowing when to strike were everything. This wasn't so different. The first step was separating my money from anything Daniel could touch. I went to a different Wells Fargo branch, one he didn't even know I used, and opened a new account in my name only. I transferred $500,000 from my existing funds, not because I needed it right away, but because it was symbolic. For the first time in years, my hard-earned money was safe from his influence, tucked neatly where no sense of entitlement could reach it. Next came logistics. I knew Daniel's routine better than he thought I did. Every Sunday he and Bethany went to brunch in the Mission. Overpriced avocado toast, bottomless mimosas, the works. They never returned before 6 in the evening. That window was perfect. I told Jennifer, my real estate agent, to schedule private showings that Sunday afternoon. discreetly, no signs, no chatter, just a quiet flow of serious buyers. The day arrived and everything went exactly as planned. 3 separate groups toured the property. The first couple was young, fresh off a tech acquisition, the kind who saw real estate as an accessory to success. The second was an investment banker from Goldman Sachs. Suit quick handshake, already talking about entertaining clients. But the third, a family from New York, stood out. They weren't flashy, just a couple with teenage kids who wanted to relocate and start over. When they stepped into the living room, the wife whispered, "It feels like a real home." For the first time that day, I smiled. By evening, Jennifer called, her voice buzzing with excitement. 3 offers, she said, all cash. 2 above, asking 1 slightly lower, but ready to close in 2 weeks. I didn't need to think long. I chose the family from New York. Timing mattered more than a few extra dollars. I wanted this chapter closed before Daniel could blink. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, the papers were signed. Sale price $285 million. Closing date, April 2nd, 2024. I hung up the phone and sat quietly for a moment, looking around the house. Sunlight poured through the same windows where Daniel used to sit doing his homework. It didn't feel like loss, it felt like liberation. I had just sold the roof over my ungrateful son's head, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Once the papers were signed and the house sale was set in motion, the noise of revenge in my head finally went quiet. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was clarity. I wasn't just cutting ties with my son's arrogance. I was planting something new, something that still had roots. I met with David Chen, my immigration lawyer, a few days later to finalize the sponsorship paperwork. Everything was ready. The documents, the background checks, the bank statements proving I had enough to support 4 relatives from Italy. I paid the fees without hesitation. Every dollar felt like an investment in something real again. With the sale proceeds on the way, I found a small apartment in Richmond. 600 square feet, modest, nothing fancy. It reminded me of the place my wife and I first rented when we came to America. The walls were thin. The floor creaked a little, but it felt honest. No marble, no designer furniture. Just a space where gratitude could breathe again. And then, on June the 15th, they arrived. I stood at the arrivals gate at San Francisco International Airport, holding 4 pieces of paper with names I hadn't seen in years: Marco Sofia Luca and Elena Moretti, my family, my blood. The first to spot me was Marco, 28, strong and wide-shouldered, like my father used to be. He dropped his bag, ran straight toward me, and hugged me so hard it hurt. "Zio Giuseppe," he shouted, his voice cracking with joy. Sophia followed next, tears already running down her face. She handed me a small package, my mother's rosary. She had kept it all this time. Luca came with a shy grin, the same one Daniel had when he was 10, and Elena stood close behind him, clutching her sketchbook like it was treasure. When we got to the apartment, it wasn't grand. There was 1 couch, a small table, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. But the second Sophia started boiling water, and Marco laid out the pasta he'd made by hand in Naples, the place came alive. The air filled with the smell of garlic and olive oil, the kind that warms you from the inside out. We sat together eating, talking, laughing in a mix of Italian and broken English. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surrounded by people trying to impress the world. I was surrounded by people who still believed in family and work, in showing up for one another. They didn't see me as a burden. They saw me as the man who brought them a new life. That night, as I washed the dishes and listened to them talking excitedly about their plans, I realized something simple but powerful. You can't force respect from those who've forgotten where they came from, but you can rebuild family with those who never did. And in that small kitchen filled with laughter and the scent of home, I finally felt like I belonged again. August 3rd, 2024, a date my son would never forget. Daniel had spent months planning his engagement party with Bethany Crawford, an event that was less about love and more about status. The guest list read like a magazine spread: judges' partners from his law firm, her family from Boston, tech executives, and a few local reporters who just happened to be invited. He wanted everything perfect, the kind of event that screamed success, the kind that proved he had outgrown his roots. The house I had built with 45 years of sweat and sacrifice looked like something out of a wedding catalogue. White tents covered the backyard, crystal glasses shimmered under strings of light, and waiters in black ties carried trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than my father made in a month. From my bedroom window upstairs, I watched it all unfold. My house had become a stage for a man pretending he built it. By 6 o'clock, guests were arriving in sleek cars that lined the street. Daniel moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, laughing at every compliment about the stunning home. Every time someone praised the renovation, I wondered if he would finally give credit where it was due. Of course he didn't. He smiled and said, "We really invested a lot in this place." Downstairs the music swelled, cameras flashed, and laughter echoed through the garden. To anyone watching, it looked like a fairy tale. But fairy tales end at midnight, and I'd scheduled mine for a little earlier. At exactly 7:15 p.m., the rumble of a diesel engine broke through the music. It was faint at first, then grew louder until everyone started turning their heads. The band stopped playing. Through the front gate came a large moving truck, headlights cutting through the dusk. Guests whispered confused. Some assumed it was a delivery. I walked out the front doors, the truck parked in the driveway. The foreman stepped down, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Moretti," he called out. I nodded. "We're here for the pickup. Whole property. Scheduled move tonight." Daniel came rushing out, face flushed, still holding his champagne glass. "There must be some mistake," he said, trying to smile for the onlookers. "We're not moving." The foreman looked at his clipboard again, calm and certain. "Address matches. 1247 Stockton Street. Move order signed 2 weeks ago. Cash sale. Closing tomorrow morning." I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, and met my son's bewildered stare. The crowd behind him had gone silent. "No mistake, Daniel," I said evenly. "I sold the house." The color drained from his face. The champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the walkway. All around us, guests froze in place, lawyers, influencers. Bethany's parents, all suddenly realizing the stage they were standing on didn't belong to him. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, calm as the man who had already made peace with his decision. "You told me once that I don't contribute," I said quietly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Consider this my final contribution." And with that, the movers began unloading dollies and boxes. Behind me, the party lights flickered. The music died, and the perfect image Daniel had spent years constructing started to collapse, piece by piece, in front of 40 witnesses and one very disappointed father. The silence that followed my announcement was the kind that hums in your ears. For a few seconds no one spoke. You could hear the faint pop of a champagne cork somewhere in the back, followed by the uneasy shifting of expensive shoes on the patio stones. Daniel just stood there, pale frozen, trying to process what he'd heard. I sold the house, I repeated steady and calm, 2 weeks ago. Cash deal. The new owners take possession tomorrow morning. Someone gasped. Others began whispering. Bethany's parents looked horrified, like they'd stumbled into the wrong kind of headline. Daniel turned towards them, trying to manage the situation, his voice cracking as he said something about a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. The contracts were signed, the check had cleared, and every inch of the marble glass and polished wood around him already belonged to someone else. That was when I decided it was time for the truth, not just about the sale, but about what I'd done with the money. I raised my voice just enough for everyone to hear, not shouting, just firm. The proceeds from this house didn't go to waste. They went to family, to 4 young people who still understand what the Moretti name stands for. The side gate opened, and 4 figures stepped through, Marcus, Sophia, Luca, and Elena Moretti, my cousin's children, the ones I had brought from Naples. They walked in, quietly, neatly dressed, heads held high. There was no arrogance. By the next morning, the story had already left the backyard and hit the internet like a storm. Someone at the party, probably one of Bethany's influencer friends, had filmed the entire confrontation. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. #engagement party, meltdown, #Italian justice, son v's father. The video had over 50,000 views by sunrise, then tripled by noon. People online had their opinions ready. Some called me a legend. Others said I was petty, but I didn't care. For once, the truth was out there, unfiltered and undeniable. The man everyone thought was just the help had written the final chapter himself. By lunchtime, the headlines started rolling in. San Francisco Chronicle ran with Italian. Father sells $2.8 million home to teach his son a lesson. The Business Journal called it Family Feud Goes Viral, Law Firm Partner Loses More Than Pride. Even lifestyle blogs joined in, spinning it into stories about boundaries, aging parents, and respect. I didn't seek attention, but watching people debate the meaning of respect while my son hid from the spotlight felt like poetic justice. At Daniel's firm, things moved fast. Morrison and Klein prided themselves on their image, old money, clean suits, and no public scandal. When one of their rising stars became the face of a viral meltdown, the partners didn't wait. They called him in for a meeting the next morning. The official statement was conduct unbecoming, but everyone knew what it really meant. His reputation was now poison. No client wants their lawyer trending for humiliating his father on camera. For years, Daniel had built a life on appearances. He cared about perception more than principle. And now, perception was the very thing tearing it all apart. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything or defend myself online. I just went for a walk. That evening through North Beach, past the spot where my old restaurant once stood. People were eating, laughing, living their lives. And I realized something Daniel still hadn't learned. Respect once lost doesn't return with an apology. It's earned back through humility. And that, I suspected, was going to take him much longer than any headline cycle. 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm, quieter, lighter, and finally my own. The house in North Beach belonged to someone else now, but Moretti's kitchen too was alive and full of energy. Every night the air was thick with the scent of fresh garlic and simmering tomatoes, the kind of smell that makes strangers feel at home. Marco ran the kitchen with the same fire I once had, teaching students how to roll gnocchi and respect the sauce. Sophia worked long hours as a nurse, caring for people who reminded her of me, always saying family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up for you. Luca had started a small engineering firm, helping Italian startups expand into the US. And Elena's paintings hung in a gallery downtown, each one capturing the soul of our heritage. Watching them succeed felt different from anything I'd ever given Daniel. There was no arrogance, no need to impress, just gratitude. Every Sunday they came to my small apartment for dinner, bringing food, laughter, and real stories. For the first time in years, the table felt full, not just with plates, but with purpose. Daniel, meanwhile, had fallen quiet. After the scandal, his law firm let him go. His engagement ended soon after. Bethany's parents didn't want their daughter tied to a man who treated his father like an inconvenience. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I also didn't rescue him. Some lessons can't be taught with money, they have to be lived. One cold evening he showed up at Moretti's kitchen too. He waited until the dinner rush had slowed and walked in looking smaller somehow. The man who once hid his Italian name behind Daniel Moore now stood before me, unsure how to start. "Dad," he said quietly, "I understand what you were trying to teach me. I lost everything that mattered for people who never cared about me." I didn't interrupt. I just let the silence sit between us until he finally looked up. "Can we try again?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "You're always welcome at Sunday dinner," I said. "But if you come back, come as Daniele Moretti. Come as the man your grandfather would recognize." He swallowed hard and nodded. That was enough for now. As he left, Marco passed by and quietly set another plate at the end of the table. "For when he's ready," he said. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not the house, not the money, but the hope that one day even the lost ones will find their way back home. In the end, it was never about the house or the money, or even revenge. It was about boundaries, quiet, invisible lines that separate love from dependency, respect from entitlement. People think protecting what's yours makes you selfish, but that's not true. Setting limits is how you teach others to value what they take for granted. I spent most of my life believing that sacrifice alone could hold a family together. I thought love meant giving, no matter how much it cost me. But what I learned is that love, without boundaries, turns into permission. Permission for others to forget your worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop allowing disrespect to live rent-free in your life. Justice doesn't always look like courtroom drama or shouting matches. Sometimes it's the quiet click of a signature on a contract. Sometimes it's simply walking away from a place that no longer deserves your presence. You don't need to humiliate anyone to teach them a lesson. You just need to act with clarity and let the truth do its work. I didn't sell that house to destroy my son's life. I sold it to rebuild my own peace, to remind both of us what real contribution looks like. It isn't money, titles, or prestige. It's decency, accountability, and gratitude. Those are the values that built my generation, the ones that fed us when money couldn't. And when I look at my new family, the ones who cook, laugh, and build together, I see what inheritance really means. Legacy isn't something you leave behind in a will. It's something you pass forward through character. It belongs to the people who protect it, with integrity, not the ones who share your last name out of obligation. If there's one truth, I've come to believe it's this: dignity doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It stands still, steady and silent, until the noise fades and only the truth remains.